Roe v. Wade has been overturned after 49 years. This is a major shift in American politics and society at large. But it doesn't actually ban abortion outright. It merely sends it back to the states. But many conservative states have passed trigger laws that ban abortion in the case that Roe v. Wade is overturned, and most of these ban abortion in all cases with the exception to save the life of the mother. And only 5 of these states include exceptions for rape and incest. Of course, these are fairly rare cases, making up less than 1% of all abortions, but the fact is they still happen, and the vast majority of people are in favor of exceptions for these cases. Now, there have been some court injunctions that prevent these laws from going into effect immediately, but the reasons for these injunctions are largely to do with logistics and not an actual challenge to the law themselves. Several of these states had multiple trigger laws, with some of them going into effect immediately, while others had a waiting period of some time after the court's ruling. This led to some confusion as to what was and wasn't illegal and at what time. In some other states like Texas, the trigger laws don't go into effect until 30 days after the court ruling, but the state has decided to enforce the law immediately after the ruling regardless of what the law said. Ultimately, these are temporary issues that will be resolved in the coming weeks. They aren't major challenges to these laws' constitutionality. So what happens to women who need an abortion in these states? Well, there is always the option to cross state lines and get an abortion in a state where it's legal. But of course, many women aren't able to afford such a trip due to all the travel expenses. This is where some blue states and some major corporations come in. California has offered to subsidize abortions for women who come from out of state, and some major corporations like Amazon are pledging to subsidize travel expenses for their employees to get an abortion in states where it's legal. While this is helpful, not many Americans actually work for a major corporation, so there will be a lot of people who fall through the gaps. And for those who do work for these companies, this may eat into their benefits, leading to these companies not having to pay their employees as much. So I think what will happen over the long run is that people who are very pro-choice will permanently move to states where it's legal. This will obviously not include people who can't afford to move, but there are plenty of wealthy and middle-class liberals and leftists who will make the trip. We actually saw this with marijuana legalization in Colorado, where a bunch of people who wanted to smoke pot moved to the state in droves. Which brings us to the political ramifications of this decision. Colorado used to be a swing state, but after a bunch of pot users moved in, it became solidly blue. Similarly, I think that abortion laws will lead to further political balkanization of this country. Democrats hope this will help them in traditionally blue states where they have been struggling to maintain their dominance recently. I think in the short term they're right, but only if Republicans continue to nominate pro-life candidates in places like Washington where that's completely unviable. However, in the long run, it won't really matter if Republicans nominate a pro-choice candidate in these states, because ultimately there will be significantly more Democrats in these states than there were previously. But Republicans also receive the benefits of political balkanization with so many Democrats leaving their states. This will lead to red states becoming redder and blue states becoming bluer. Purple states might start to lean a bit more in one direction or the other depending on their laws and demographic makeup, but most of them will likely remain contested. Speaking of demographics, some have speculated that this would help Republicans among Hispanic voters, and help Democrats among white voters. But the polling on this shows little to no difference between these two groups on this issue, though you could argue that the more left-leaning Hispanics in California are distorting this poll's applicability to other states. If there is a shift among Hispanics to the right, then the two states to look at are Nevada and New Mexico, both of which would become swing states in this scenario. Of course, even if there is a shift, state parties still need to build up their infrastructure in states that they were previously non-competitive, so don't expect any major changes in the immediate term. I also don't think it will change national politics that much, despite Democrats hoping it will favor them in the midterms. This will remain a states issue, as neither side is willing to compromise on an issue that they feel so morally attached to. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get any legislation passed that isn't related to the budget, and getting a supermajority like that is extremely rare, and when it does happen, it's usually with the help of moderate candidates. It's also constitutionally questionable to pass any laws on this topic federally, as the 10th Amendment says that any powers not explicitly given to the federal government are given to the state. The Republicans are more likely to adhere to federalism than Democrats, So I think they will recognize this, the majority at least. The Democrats will continue to campaign on this issue nationally, but they'll never get anything through on it. So ultimately, the best way forward for Democrats is to campaign on compromises in red and purple states. Most Americans support abortion access in the first trimester, and if Democrats are able to achieve this in red states, that covers 92% of all abortions. If they're able to limit it to the first 20 weeks in purple states, that covers 99% of all abortion cases, and that's not even the end of the second trimester. In short, if Democrats are willing to compromise a little, they very well could get most of what they want, even in many conservative states. But of course, that's assuming they actually want to solve this issue and not just use it to get more votes and fundraising dollars from it. They can portray it as dying on the hill of principles all they want, but if those principles are only 1 to 10% of the population, they're just getting in the way at that point. It might sound a bit cynical, but if you turn down $1 billion because you wanted $1.5 billion, there's probably another reason why you turned it down. As for Republicans, your best defense on this issue is to have the very reasonable exceptions of rape, incest, and the life of the mother at a bare minimum. You could also stick to the heartbeat laws banning abortion after 6 weeks. Then you could portray the Democrats' proposal of banning it after 12 weeks as just incrementalist slippery slope tactics. It would also only cover 43% of all abortions, so it would still be severely limited. If Democrats continue to act all apoplectic when abortions are still available in a limited capacity, then it would be easy to portray them as radicals on this issue. With all of that said, I don't expect either side to take my advice, and America will start to balkanize politically. What do you think the implications of this decision will be, and do you agree with it to begin with? Thank you all very much for watching, and have a nice day.